to end the day, and thank you for sticking with us. Kathryn Janda, if I'm going to be more formal, from the Environmental Change Institute in Oxford University, who's going to be talking about telling tales, which is a really interesting approach to energy policy. So I think it's very, very relevant to all of the different approaches that we have been talking about today, just to demonstrate how many aspects there are to looking at energy use and energy policy. So without further ado.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kathryn. So I'm Katie Janda. I've been in the energy efficiency field for about 25 years. You may note from my accent that I'm not originally from this aisle. I am from the United States. I've done a bunch of work at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. I've worked in the U.S. federal government as a postdoctoral Science and Policy Fellow, working with their Energy Star Buildings program. And the talk I'm going to give today really reflects, I think, some thoughts that I've had over that period of time about what it is we're doing and how we're doing it. So it's not really about methods per se, it's kind of almost meta-methods. And the last bit of the panel, which was talking about, sort of impact and what are we doing and which kind of method works well and how do we justify ourselves, that is almost a smaller discussion than the one that I want to introduce to you today, which is really writ large. What kind of story do we tell when we're trying to do academic research, and who are we talking to? And are there different ways of doing that, and how do those different ways, I mean, obviously there are different ways, but how do those ways fit together? And the way I think about this is, I'm calling it from realism to cubism, and incorporating multiple viewpoints. If we're talking about sustainability, there is no one way of doing sustainability, and different stakeholders will have different perspectives. So that was what I meant to do. That was what I meant to do. So realism is, in art, a single point perspective, where we see in the same way that we would see as a person. We have a particular viewpoint, and we see an object, and that object is clear. As opposed to something like cubism, where they're trying to represent, Picasso was trying to represent multiple different perspectives at one time, even though you are the viewer. So just keep that in mind, because I think, from my perspective, I think that understanding sustainability and doing research is much more like cubism than like realism. And that means that your picture is slightly fuzzy, and it's not actually the sort of straight-on evidence-based idea. It's what Michelle was talking about, this notion of, like, if you have rubbish questions, the data you get may be quantitative, but there'll also be rubbish. And so I think that's something good to keep in mind. All right, so I'm going to talk about storytelling because there's a new focus, I think, on storytelling and energy research. There's a few examples. The International Energy Agency has a demand-side management task on behavior change, which is using storytelling as a method, both of research and of communication. There's a Stories of Change Arts and Humanities grant that was given to the Open University, which is gathering information in the form of stories. I'm guest co-editing a special issue of Energy Research and Social Science, which is about narratives and storytelling in climate change research. And all of these areas have common purposes in that it's a research method. Storytelling can be a research method that does fit in with what you've been talking about today. And it's a way of being able to give voice to more diverse and often unheard people. It's also used as a communication, so outgoing, after the research is done, you tell the story of your research, and that would be the sort of video kind of format that people are doing now. And it's also a way of engaging people. So there's different ways in which stories can be used. What I'm going to talk about today is augmenting what I call the common frame already used in sustainability research. We'll get into that in a minute. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to give you a description of the problem, which is that sustainability research is focused on hero stories of technology and design, and that these hero stories don't often actually work quite the way that they were initially scripted. I'm going to give an introduction to learning stories by looking at hero and learning stories in 3 different case studies. That would be the Adam Joseph Lewis Center for Environmental Studies at Oberlin College, USA. I used to work in this building, so I know quite a lot about it. The TSB Retrofit for the Future project, which was retrofits of about 100 buildings here in the UK. And a European project, which looked at 4 European cities. And thousands of buildings. So these are all cases in which there was a hero story about what was going to happen with a particular research project or a demonstration project. And that hero story did not quite go as planned. The last piece of the talk is really going to be about a new frame for further research and policy recommendations. And I'm suggesting that there be a system of stories. So it's not either or, you know, I mean, it's this question of how do you do multi-methods and how do you actually integrate quantitative and qualitative. But it's not just that. I think it really is thinking about what types of stories are important at which part of the research and demonstration project in the process of making change in the built environment. Okay, so again, it's a bigger thing than what's happening just in your research project. So the sustainability hero story, this is, you know, one depiction of it. But basically, this is from the 2030 challenge, which is an architectural based project in the US. And it's just look at the pictures there. You know, you see design strategies, technologies and systems, and off-site renewable energy. These are 3 pillars of how to create sustainability. Is there anything missing from this picture? Michelle doesn't think there's anything missing. I think she's being sarcastic. So there's no people in there. And so the whole enterprise of the kind of technological approach basically says technology and design will save us. We don't have to change lifestyles or work styles. We can nudge people. Right, so somebody mentioned that there was an increase in the interest in qualitative research. I think that sort of goes with the whole nudge thing because that can be quantified and then, you know, RCT trials can be done on that too. It's very tiny things, like nobody's actually supposed to change, they're just supposed to magically get nudged. But my problem is that do sustainability projects always deliver what they promise? And I want you to think now of a project that you've been involved in, a demonstration project, and think, you know, you wanted to do X. Did the project do the thing that you wanted it to do? I mean, there's an aim, there's a goal. And I would say that you have this aim and you're trying to hit a target, right? We often set targets for ourselves. But in the projects I've been involved in, we tend to fall short of the target. And not just once, but actually multiple times. And so what this asked me, and as I said, I've been in the energy efficiency area for 25, close to 30 years now. And there's always this thing about the energy efficiency gap. And we're going to close the energy efficiency gap. And every project I've been in, we're trying to close the energy efficiency gap. And then it doesn't quite work. And then it's people are the problem. There's the performance gap, or it's modeling, it's something. And I kind of feel like, you know, maybe there's something else going on. This is another example of something that, you know, just to bring it to the UK, that, you know, obviously we set policy targets and then we scrap them. This was the ill-fated Green Deal, where we're going to have, you know, new zero carbon homes, and then we decided, oh no, we're not, right? So we set targets and we fall short of them. Now, we could consider this to be kind of insane, because actually doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is one definition of insanity. So just hold that in your mind as a possibility. Are we insane? I think that maybe we should think about it in a different way, to actually have a hero complex, right? And why would we have a hero complex? It's because this hero story of technology will save us means that we're not insane. Hooray! It means that we're selfless good do-gooders, fighting evil and saving the world. That sounds more like us, doesn't it? It's a soothing story because it means that technology will take away your need to be responsible for things. And it's very popular with funders. We asked, somebody else was mentioning this, you know, why would you have this kind of thing? And it's popular because for all these reasons. The problem is that with this superhero story is that energy waste isn't evil. We don't deliver what we promised, and we're overly focused on success. Why is an over-focus on success, specifically a quantitatively defined success, why is that a problem? The problem is that when you focus on success, on the other hand, you also focus on failure. So you set up a binary system, which is very simplistic and doesn't always reflect reality. So if you focus on failure, then, so if you focus on success, you have failure. And what failure often turns into is this notion of the horror story. Now, there are horror stories in the sustainability area. For instance, people have died. Like, installing installation in Australia. You know, deaths have occurred as a result of energy efficiency strategies. That is actually true. But it's not usually what happens. So the failure is usually fairly minor. So we don't want to talk about it because it's failure. And so my question is, in this binary success-failure thing, is there something else that we can bring in to talk about what we're learning in a more positive way? So can we learn anything from literature about telling a better story? So when I started looking at this, and I conceived of the hero story, Joseph Campbell has done a lot of work on the monomyth, which is basically a story about how heroes do their work. So this is a very old story, and basically the notion here is that the hero's journey goes from the ordinary world into a special world. This one goes around clockwise, and what's interesting to me is just keep those ideas. The special world, the ordinary world is the one we're in now. The special world is where the hero does battle with, you know, the evil villain. And if you think about it in terms of movies, they're often in very special sort of interstitial spaces. So one of the things is, if you think about the Die Hard movies, where is Bruce Willis fighting the villains? It's like in the elevator shaft. You know, it's places where the phone is cut off. You know, so that you have this little crucible, this special world where certain conditions exist. And I think we get stuck in that special world in the energy efficiency area. But this is just an example of how the ordinary world and special world, and it's actually the hero's journey, was used as a storyboard for the movie Platoon. It's actually going the other way around there, but just to say, it's not just my idea. Hollywood actually uses this monomyth explicitly in being able to construct something which is exciting for audiences to see. So I'm proposing that we talk about a different kind of story. Actually, there's going to be two different kinds of stories. One is the learning story, and what is the learning story? A learning story is used in research and teaching, usually of children. I'm taking it out of this kind of child idea. But it occurs in the real world, that would be the ordinary world, not in fictionalized spaces. It's a specific context, place, and people play a role in the lesson, so it's interactive. And it requires active engagement of both the learner and the teacher. And it's not about technologies, right? So it's about interaction. And that's a very different kind of story than the hero story. We'll also say that when I gave this talk in a number of different places last year, and I was in New Zealand. And when I gave this talk, they said that there's actually a term for that in Maori, which is, it's the ako. Maybe it's the kind of, anyways, it's, that means that actually this thing that's happening at the same time, as opposed to an instructor telling you what you need to know, that it's a bidirectional thing. So moving back to this, I said I was going to do 3 case studies. This is going back to the case studies to give you a sense of what is the hero story and what I think the learning story is beneath the hero story. For the Alan Joseph Lewis Center for Environmental Studies, the architect Bill McDonough said, it's building like a tree, it generates more energy than it consumes. The hero story for the Retrofit for the Future project was that deep retrofits can deliver 80% carbon reductions. And for the last one, the EU program, it was that community-scale renewable and rational use of energy will produce social and environmental benefits, right? So none of these things are odd. We read them, you know, I mean, that seems fairly reasonable, things that you would do, but are they actually true? Let's find out. So at the HALC, it's a relatively small building. As I mentioned, Bill McDonough was the architect, has a number of green features. Passive solar heat, daylighting, ground source heat pumps, living machine, which was internally recycled waste, and so forth, integrated landscaping. But did it produce more energy than it consumed? And the answer was, well, it depended on what time frame you were talking about. So when it was initially built, we can see that this is, right, in 2003, that the green line shows that it is using more energy than it consumes, producing more energy than it consumes on sunny days. But that's not an annual basis, so what else can it do? So on an annual basis, we'd see that it fails to produce more energy than it consumes because it's a heating-dominated climate. So there you have the renewables, and there you have the heating load. So not even really close to being like a tree in that respect. So a lot of work was done to try and figure out what was going on, were the heat pumps working properly. There were some actual problems that there was an electric boiler which was just left on. Nobody commissioned it, so that was found as a result of doing this work. But when they added the PV production in, basically, all right, so the idea was, let's go back. Well, so we had an original 60 kilowatt photovoltaic array, and the idea was actually we could add more energy efficiency, and that would, and fix the system. But instead what they decided to do was spend $1 million and add a 100 kilowatt photovoltaic array to fix the problem. So this is what we see again, the graph that with the 60 kilowatt array and a little bit of energy demand reduction, we got about 50% of the way to managing things with just the photovoltaic array. Again, just the technology was only about 40% of the solution. If you add, and this is so years in building occupancy, this is now going up to 12 years, right? At the end over here. You add the 101 kilowatt parking lot PV, and you actually get, more energy because it's a larger array. But what it didn't get all the way to 100% until they hired a building manager to actually be able to work the building and get the arrays to work properly and get the consumption to match. So the learning story here is that it's still not about the technology, even though they added more than double what they'd originally planned and so forth. In the Retrofit for the Future program, there were all kinds of different things that needed to happen with social housing tenants. I don't know how familiar you are with this particular area, but there were 119 building units, 86 different projects. One of my PhD students has done a lot of work on this, and this data comes from her PhD thesis. But there's a hero story here. We're going to look at one building that there's a Victorian terrace. You can see there's a big eco-makeover. You see, the feedback system, people smiling behind the feedback system. The happy architect displaying, the wonderful technologies that have happened there. And what we see when we look at the numbers, the top ones are, we have pre and post models and pre and post actual, okay? So I would call this the special world, which is the modeled world. And in the modeled world, everything's fine. There's 81% reduction of both gas and electricity. Hooray! However, in the real world, you measure what people were actually using before and after, it's nowhere close to 81%. And so, again, we're stuck in this special world. You're allowed to use model data to satisfy the TSD because you don't have anything else, or you don't know what's going to happen, and so we're convincing ourselves with things of our own making. And what's interesting about this learning story, however, is that the people who were in the house were very satisfied because they weren't doing the numbers. They actually liked the house just fine. There were things that were actually broken, but they thought that was part of the new thing. So for instance, they couldn't get hot water to the bathtub upstairs, and so they would ferry it up because they thought that was like what solar hot water does. There was a broken pump, but they didn't even say, there's a problem, because they were so happy with the overall comfort that there was a huge forgiveness factor, which I thought was very interesting because that was also not captured by what the TSV was looking for. So the problems of interpretation here is like, which story is actually true? The last case study here is Crescendo, which of course has a long and confusing acronym, as many European projects do. But I love that part, to ensure optimal quality of life. Okay, so what it did was have technical and social monitoring of energy efficiency and renewable energy projects in 4 different cities in various places. I was responsible for the social monitoring, which I turned into social research because social monitoring seemed very big brotherish to me. The hero story, and there's a glossy brochure, it's fantastic. The project funded thousands of houses, Lots of public and commercial buildings. We installed PV panels. We did all this stuff. Solar thermal, 2 district heating systems, hooray. They estimated the carbon savings at 30%, hooray. But the brochure also claims that the project demonstrates how to meet citizens' wishes of living in comfortable, energy-efficient homes in a clean and healthy environment. Well, since I was responsible for evaluating some of those things, I can tell you that my results did not make the glossy brochure. And these are some of the results that did not make the glossy brochure, which is, so in Milton Keynes, there were over 400 new apartments connected to a CHP plant, and this was we were supposed to be monitoring how well people liked being attached to a CHP plant. And how much energy efficiency drew their considerations. What we see here is when I asked them, what attracted you to your new apartment? Energy savings was down here. Of course, it's just like anything else. Location, 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 affordability. I mean, why was it that just because the EU gave this building some money that all of a sudden the people in it would have this magical, actually not even educated. There was no information about this stuff. They were supposed to magically know that this apartment building was better through osmosis. And that's what I was measuring. I was measuring osmosis. So what we find is that 57% of the people were unaware that their flats were designed to be energy efficient. About half were not aware of the connection to CHP. Of those who were aware, they hated it. In the Netherlands, this I thought was interesting, so this is one of the other unintended consequences that happens, is that the floor area of some of the homes ended up being bigger. So that's sort of a typical Dutch home on the left-hand side, but the private commissioners built their houses and looked much more like an American kind of house. And so if you're looking at efficiencies on a per square foot basis, but not on aggregate per residential unit, that sort of stuff is cloaked and hidden. In Corsica, there was a new house in a historic area, so the PV was